Yes. Let's bring in our next guest. Ian Lesser is Distinguished Fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Ian, thanks for being with us. I'm wondering what your take on the situation is right now. Donald Trump saying this could go on for 4 to 5 weeks. This is the same Donald Trump who said, of course, he didn't want to get the US involved in forever wars abroad.
Well, good to be with you. This situation is evolving very rapidly, and the prospects for escalation, both in terms of the nature of the strikes, but also in terms of the geography, can also expand. We've seen limited strikes in Cyprus, but there's the potential also for Iran to reach even southern Europe, Turkey, southern Europe. All of these things are possible. U.S. bases in Greece and Turkey. That would be a substantial escalation, obviously, and it would even implicate NATO directly. So I'm not predicting that, but it just goes to underscore the extent to which Europe itself is actually not just a stakeholder in this crisis, but also exposed to the consequences.
Hear exactly what you're saying. The drone hitting, of course, the UK base on the island of Cyprus. Cyprus, of course, is part of the European Union. We understand that drone was fired not from Iran, but from southern Lebanon. Do we read anything into this? I mean, clearly there are Iranian proxies operating there.
Well, that's right. And I think, you can also see in the Israeli strikes that are being conducted over the last days in Lebanon, that the Israelis at least see this as part of a complex of not just the Iranian the conflict with Iran directly, but also Iran's support for proxies in the region and others who are, quite willing to reach out and strike not just Israeli targets, but also others. And so, this is just another dimension, it seems to me, of how this is not just a limited conflict between Iran and Israel and the United States, but is involving lots of others, frankly, on both sides. And it may be that, as Donald Trump says, this goes on for weeks. And, what will be the end state? It's quite possible that these strikes will be as far as it goes. It will either provoke a change or a change of kind in the regime, possibly a coup, something of that nature, or not. And it would be quite possible at that point for the United States and Israel and others who might be part of this coalition to say, well, look, we reduced Iran's capacity to do the following things, including their ballistic missile arsenal, and well, at that point, essentially disengage. And maybe that will lead to further diplomacy, or maybe it won't.
There are so many questions to be asked, Ian, and this is a fast-moving situation now, as you were saying. The question of international law, we've had the statement from Iran's permanent representative at the UN, Amir Saeed Iravani, backed up by a statement that's coming to me from the Iranian embassy here in Paris regarding the targeting of civilians. And we heard from our correspondent in Tehran that there was a suspected double tap attack in the east of Tehran, which under the Geneva Convention and the Rome Statute would be deemed illegal. Whilst some people might say, analysts, that what is happening in changing the regime in Iran or getting rid of the Ayatollah, however you want to put it, would be a good thing to do, clearly what is being done, perhaps legally, is questionable.
I think the administration in Washington has been quite clear that this is not at the top of their agenda. They see an existential threat emanating from Iran. Israel obviously feels that even more directly. And, in this kind of a situation, sort of the niceties of international law, unfortunately, go to the wayside. And, clearly that's also been true of Iranian behavior in the past. But it's not a good moment in terms of the human costs of conflict. It's not a good moment in terms of the potential for further escalation and conflict. And whether or not civilian targets are actually being targeted intentionally, I actually doubt that. But on an attack of this scale, it would be very surprising if there weren't very substantial civilian casualties in any case. And that's simply the reality of a conflict of this kind. It's extremely sad, but it's the reality.
Indeed, I think most people would agree with your assessment there with to my devil's advocate question. In terms of what happens next, though, I mean, clearly, if this goes on for 4 or 5 weeks, Donald Trump may be in the situation where he's perhaps going to go against everything he campaigned on, which was basically not getting the US involved in another lengthy foreign conflict. And he has actually today ruled out the sending of troops. Do you envisage a situation where that might happen?
I think that's still very, very unlikely because that's crossing really a kind of political red line in the United States. We're about 9 months out from midterm elections in the United States. And, already for much of the president's base, this kind of international activism, and this isn't obviously the only example, is surprising and provokes a lot of skepticism. That said, if the president can come away with something that is ostensibly a victory from this, and 4 and 5 weeks is not, frankly, a very long time, as long as it doesn't involve a large-scale ground presence of any kind, then I think, the American public may actually support it. After all, the United States has been in a conflictual relationship with Iran for almost 50 years. There's a very strong sort of pent-up mood of trying to get some justice for what has, from an American perspective, been decades of violence against not just Americans, but our interests and others. I think, I wouldn't underestimate the president's ability to read the political mood. He obviously is very strongly committed to this operation, even if he has to take some political risks to do it.
Indeed, hear what you're saying. Most Americans, we understand, according to surveys, not with Trump on this operation. And one wonders as well, sort of, how does this stand in terms of Trump saying he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, there was some polling done actually just before this strike that I've seen that suggests that maybe only about 20% of Americans supported the further use of force against Iran. But that said, there is a tendency to rally behind the flag. And if there aren't large costs to the United States, human costs to the United States, if markets and energy markets aren't destabilized, if all of those things that are possible don't actually happen, the president may, in a sense, get away with it and actually, pull something out that he can claim as a victory. I think he's clearly looking for that. In general, his performance on these fronts has been very surprising. I mean, not only has he been very active, but he's certainly not the isolationist that many might have imagined at the beginning of his second term. Very unilateralist, perhaps, but very activist as well. Arguably the most foreign policy-oriented president since George H.W. Bush.
Ian Lesser, Distinguished Fellow of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you, sir, for sharing your analysis with us. Thanks for your time, sir. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here in France.
Good to be with you.
We appreciate it. Thank you.